Yeah, I think the only thing we ever really have is our story.
Hmm.
Um, and like nations, I guess going to the start of the conversation, nations and people and communities, all they have is this story.
Hmm.
Um, and I particularly think that Scotland has a very powerful story that it tells about who they are, who we are
Hmm.
in Scotland. And when you look at places like uh, England, oh, I'm going to say it, and everyone's going to
Hmm.
send you email. They don't have such a strong story about their identity, and I think this
Hmm.
allows that kind of lack of roots,
Hmm.
allows the like different thinking to assimilate in different kind of ways, and it gathers around rootless people or people who are being told a particular powerful narrative um, by other people. And I think this is really what's at the heart of like bringing it to the subject, like the folk magic and community and belief. It's kind of all it's the stories that we tell and how much we listen to those stories and how many people try and remove those stories from people. And it can be a personal story, it can be a collective story, or a story of a town, or a story of a city, or a story of a country, right? And it's kind of like it's those narratives that I think drive change rather than science in a way. Oh my God, I'm not anti-science by any means, but um, you'll know that like science isn't necessarily objective in the sense of like pure science because it's driven by political interest or money or there's loads of kind of research papers written about one thing that if someone's been funded enough will find evidence to refute the fact of and especially kind of being in the space of that idea of knowledge that you have learned to mistrust or dismiss. We've kind of been brought up, I guess, in that kind of positivistic, objective, non-embodied, told by a man, usually in a top-down fashion kind of way. And that's the knowledge that we trust. And in that knowledge is the story of us too. And it's kind of retelling of a story that is from a bottom-up sense, where these young people get that sense of like gravitas and rootedness from. And it's kind of actually then grows from the person rather than is imposed as an ideology. And I think that's where that's what Scottish people are very good at that. Irish people too, in fact, like a lot of storytellers in Ireland and Scotland, very good, very, very good. Some of them, my friends, they're amazing. Like they move a whole audience. Like I've never seen anything like it in my life. And they're just talking about a stick, Chase. Like somebody was talking about a stick they picked up in the woods, and it was just the story of this fucking stick. And I was just like, I'm so emotional about this fucking stick. Fuck. Yeah,
Wow.
we're seeing. I think we're seeing it a lot in the. Sorry to move up and down the scale of like
No.
personal to kind
Yeah.
of wider, but we're seeing it a lot in the storytelling of the ecological parties in the UK. The Green Party is what they're called, and they're using stories really, really well. There was the stories of greyhounds. I will send it to you if I can find it. It was just one of the
Yeah.
candidate who's running against a fascist in England, and she's amazing. She's a plumber. She's not like your typical politician. She's a plumber. She looks after broken greyhounds. She's pretty young, head screwed on, part of the community against this like far right fasci guy who's super educated and went to university and has loads of doctorates and is a massive cunt. Excuse me. But he is. Uh, and she's literally like up against this guy. Like it's literally kind of two worlds colliding when they're talking. And he's not been turning up for hustings because he's not getting his way and how they're going. So like, and she was just telling the story about greyhounds, and then she was like how she adopted in the UK. We have greyhound racing, and it's you probably have the same. And it's pretty horrible, and the dogs are trained to chase after little rag things, and if they're really shy at it, then they just get killed. And then they train a
Mm-hmm.
new. So a lot of people rescue the wee greyhound dogs, and she rescued one of those. And she was like, he was lost, I was lost, and we were both lost together, and we kind of like found each other's bark. And I was just like, beautiful. So I'm not doing it justice really, but it
Mm-hmm.
was really quite like, and she goes, and this is why we do the politics that we do, because everyone's a little lost and we all need to help each other in community find each other's bark. And I was just like, oh, it's just really nice.
Yeah. Ooh. It's so I love everything you're saying because it really chimes. Well, not I don't only love it because I agree, but I do love it because I agree too. That there's this sense of yeah that the way in which story is so foundational to this whole thing and being able to, you said, like really look deeply at anything, like that to look deeply at a stick or to look deeply at the relationship with the
It'd
great
stick with me now.
greyhound, and then be able to there's a way in which like that allowing looking deeply at something and then finding it in your story and then being able to tell about it is like it restores this whole I don't know, mythic elements, the word that's coming, but I'm not sure that's really what I mean, to something where the stick actually is like re people, it's like re-peopleized as a being in the cosmos by bringing it into the story, or and the greyhound too, like to allow the personhood of that greyhound to be really come alive through bringing it into a story, and then be able to skillfully like um find the cultural meaning in that. I think that that's that place that where these real storytellers really function so incredibly, is like to then turn us towards the value that's hidden. Tyson Yunkaporta, the Aboriginal Australian scholar, in his book Right Story, Wrong Story, talks about how you know there is like that data without analysis is meaningless, right? It's just like we kind of amass a bunch of data, but if we don't do analysis, then it's not worth anything. And then he does this incredible thing where after that he says, but there is no analysis without story. Like we can't, there is no data analysis without story. We can't just put it in and then have a machine chomp it and put it out. Like there's always a story when we do analysis. And if the story is relationality and meaning and like togetherness, I guess on some way that's what I would mean when I say animism. Um, then the analysis that comes out the other side of a story about a stick is like reconnect, like deep connection with place and the like meaningfulness of being a person with roots, like is so potent, for creating like you said, creating that social cohesion that makes a family or a community or a nation function like as a like as a meaningful thing. Um and I love how you're pushing me towards like this sense of the personal stories that are unrepeatable, that only you could have had, are just as meaningful for that creation of cohesion as the story that we share, like across bigger, you know um, masses of people, where and that in a globalized world where we can have this Zoom call from California and Scotland, like
It's amazing.
these huge swaths, right? Like where you and I can, there's stories that we both live in that create that meaningful connection too. Um,
Yeah, I think the guy went on to tell the story about the stick, and he took it to school, and then he lost the stick. And then
mm,
kids were like, "What happened to the stick?" Like they were super, super sad about the stick.
mm-hmm.
And he was, "Oh, well, let's go and find a new one." Fuck,
Yeah.
because it was a stick at the end of the day. But they all were totally like, "Yeah, we all need to find our own stick." Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
passing on the stick love. But yeah, I think that's this idea of story is fascinating because we don't, as you say, we don't have anything without story, and nothing is really objectively given to us without us individually or collectively making sense of it. Apart from dreams, I guess, but even those
Mm-hmm.
are they subjective? Are they objective? Who knows? Like, but we there are stories on there. There are like nighttime stories, but where I think for me that links into the kind of the Creven She stuff and the Dukas stuff that I know that you wanted to maybe touch on a little bit is that the those are the stories that are our community stories. So
Mm-hmm.
our animism lives in the kind of the creed of she, which is like really frivolously translated as like the fairy faith stuff. But if you look at all of the story, all of it is stories. Like it's stories about not stealing someone's butter, for example, or where the devil lives in your community. By devil, I don't mean devil. I mean like folk devil, which would be like um, a story we weren't allowed to tell if we're going to keep
Mm-hmm.
going with the story analogy, right?
Mm-hmm.
A non-sanctified story. So yeah, so there's stories about those. There's stories about things that you should do and not kind of do. And
Mm-hmm.
all of it is really just us telling us the story of place too, because massively and not many people, I don't know this or appreciate it. Like Scotland has a storytelling tradition that's very land based, and you
Mm-hmm.
can tell the stories. And you'll know from the Finian stories and Finn McCool and all of those kind of characters that there's places where it's like where his horse fell over in a particular
Mm-hmm.
story. So when people would walk through the environment that they were in, they would be telling the stories, and it would be, but also like we have really other stories of that aren't as kind of renowned and well known, but like they're local stories where it's called like Bob's Hill. And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, who the fuck is Bob and why does he have a hill? And then you kind of dig into it, and people are like, oh, Bob had a sheep, and they'll tell you the story. And it was such a memorable story that that becomes Bob's Hill or such the
Mm-hmm.
third field or whatever. Um, so when I talk about stories and when I talk about animism, I guess for want of a better word, or the Creban sheep, this is really the connection that we're talking about. That it's quite a local connection, but then it brings people together in community, and that's the kind of the quarter day stories,
Mm-hmm.
and then through the kind of sense of Ducas and stuff, it becomes a wider, or used to become a wider Scotland wide story than it is now because of imperialism and all of that. Ugh, let's not talk about
Mm-hmm.
just that stuff that we don't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, like but all we do have are stories, really. Uh, and it's what we do with those stories, isn't it? But animism is particularly telling us a different story than the one that
Mm-hmm.
we tell or people tell themselves on a kind of daily basis. And that's what's really interesting. I think bringing it back to the work that I do in community, it's kind of like, well, the kind of the ducus of a thing or the rooted or the let's not use the word ducus for this because ducus is kind of something else, but the word belonging, it's probably like
Mm-hmm.
how do you belong? And there's so many disenfranchised young people that I know that are like, where is my belonging? Where am I? Am I on an on
Mm-hmm.
do I, like a lot of them belong in like magical online spaces. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of weird. It's almost like yeah, it's not weird, it's lovely. And lots of people are like, you're always on your phone and the internet. No, 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 no.
Mm-hmm.
It's like because actually that they're in a very safe online community, and it could be around a game or it could be around a particular lifestyle choice or it could be around
Mm-hmm.
things, and um but these don't exist either. These are kind of weird third spaces that
Mm-hmm.
exist out with, but they have their own stories too, right? World of Warcraft, I think, has loads of stories.
I'll publicly confess that I was like an 8 hour a day World of Warcraft player for many, many
Truth's out, man.
years.
Like,
More, um, I think because I was concurrently playing tabletop role playing games at the same
mm,
time, those are the ones that I can really reminisce about, where it's like I, rem- I when I remember a particular dungeon or a particular uh, encounter in a D&D game or even in World of Warcraft, I actually remember it as my character. We're not sitting around a table. We're in wherever it is, and there's this like magical um, circle that kind of puts you in another world, and there's such of yeah, I can really resonate with what you're saying of like there's that space of belonging that exists in that third space that may that in a certain way like has been really hard to touch in other spaces, like in a more sanctioned space of the world, um, that like I really crave. And I I ran a tabletop role playing business for about 7 years when I was living in Oakland, where we would where I had like three or four groups of teenagers that I would meet with once or twice a week, and we'd play these like epic 5 year long D&D games, and then every summer we do like a D&D intensive and get out in the forest and literally play 8 to 10 hours of D&D a day and just like dive in, and it was the most potent experience I've ever had of like magical transformation, like over those years of watching these kids like uh, create these characters, test out aspects of their personality or things that they were curious about, or and then over the 5 years you suddenly are seeing that the character they were in the game now is like aspects of that are actually have become integrated parts of their personality, and they're like working in the world with these like grand powerful aspects that they developed in the game, around courage or around cunning or around even like gender and social identity, like these aspects that were um, it, that came alive through story, because they had this data inside of themselves that was coming up that they didn't know what to do with, and then in through the aspect of the group storytelling we were doing, it became this personal truth. And I remember those moments at the table in the game, um, as if we're there, not as if we're sitting around a like rinky dink picnic table in the woods, which is also fun, But I think there's a way in which, for those of us in the U.S. who live at a significant remove from functioning, um, like folkloric culture, um, things like D&D give us a flavor of living in that shared story, or online role playing games too. Like other than I've played a lot of them other than WoW.
Yeah, same. I am like I have played tabletop. I'm old. I have played tabletop role-playing games since they kind of first came out.
Of some kind.
But it's also beautiful, as you say, like see it. It's like really nice as an adult to sit around a table with adults who do stuff that's serious on a day-to-day basis, and you just like put all of that on a wee hook for
Mm-hmm.
like we only play for 4 hours because otherwise I'm like I'm dying and frazzled and I have no
Yeah.
imagination left. You've trained me out.
Yeah.
Um, but like just suspending like the world for like 4 hours and kind of just collectively hallucinating together for a
Mm-hmm.
bit. And
Mm-hmm.
also you're kind of you are cool at what you do and it's kind of an imaginary problem. And like actually
Mm-hmm.
if you don't necessarily do it the right way, like the repercussions are imaginary. So it allows you to
Mm-hmm.
flex, as you say, in lots of different uh, kind of dimensions like
Mm-hmm.
across that you wouldn't normally do, and as a reformed psychologist like I would probably put that across. Imagination is a really really powerful way of dealing with lots of stuff as well,
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, yeah, it's when you see your kind of friend at the table and they're like, this is kind of starting to hit a little bit of a note with me personally that you're like, oh yeah, it's working. It's kind of magic now.
Mhm.
It's like doing
Mhm.
its thing. It's so nice. And you get to know parts of your friends that you would never really encounter in a real world setting, like in a business
Mhm.
meeting, it's kind of
Mhm.
like you're sitting around your spreadsheets. It's like a
Mhm.
very different vibe.
Yeah.
Um, but it's beautiful. Like, yeah, again, it's the storytelling vein, isn't it? It's that kind of like we're telling new stories, we're using your imagination, and
Mhm.
we're letting people kind of go where they want to go with it,
Mhm.
helping them kind of find the reasons for, and also like that whole fighting the bad guy, right? It's kind of
Mhm.
in a world that's like not black and white. Sometimes it's really
Mhm.
nice to know like that is the bad guy. There is
Yeah.
no, there's, or are they? Yeah, but
Mhm.
there's no chance that they're not. So you can rail against it in every sense, um,
Mhm.
without ambiguity. Who
Mhm.
knew we would be talking about tabletop role-playing games today?
No, we can't. We couldn't know. But I think that there's some. I'm curious what you might think about the way in which you know like the myth life and the story life and the folkloric stories like have similar roles to this kind of thing that we're talking about, where I know for me as somebody who tells a lot of stories to like tells a lot of folkloric stories but also mythic stories to folks, there's this way in which maybe it's because I came up playing D&D, but what I'm attempting to do is to have that same experience in a room of people, but um, uh, with a story about Saint Bridget, or a story about Finn McCool, or a story about um, uh, the Lithuanian princess and the snakes, or whatever's going to come into the room. Um, that really what we're doing is we're taking a walk through imagination together. And oftentimes I find myself saying like I don't really know what I'm doing, and my wife really likes to challenge me and be like, well, actually you've studied these stories for and like got so deep inside of them that you don't need to know what's next because your scholar self figured it out. you know and there's this way in which you open up, like as a storyteller, one thing I see what happen, you open up the imaginary and then you just take people on a walk, and they become alive when they start to move on their own, like things start to happen that maybe aren't in the notated um, version in the collection, but they're true enough to the ecology of the story and the types of relationships that we see. um I feel like there's some way in which like hearing an oral story around a fire, or at the hearth, or just like in a community setting, um it can function similar to these tabletop role playing games, where like the limits are not the same limits that the ethnographers put on them when they wrote them down.
No, yeah, and this was something I was thinking about before we had this call is um around the use of terms, like because I've
Mhm.
used the word ducus and it's like, what does this mean for me? And I'm like, well, it's a word, right? Like it's a
Mhm.
word particularly attached to Gaeldom too. And it's a word that's really loaded here, but it's just a word at the end, but it's not. It also carries a lot of meaning, but it's a word that Empire and the British project and whiteness has tried to kind of eradicate from stuff. And it's a
Mhm.
word that is invoking a lot of land back movements in Scotland. Like it's great, but it's a Gaelic word, and it's for the Gaels to decide, right? Really,
Mhm.
uh, but if you don't, where am I going with this? If you don't practice the word, it's just a word, and what you're talking about is like a story on a page is a story on a page,
Mhm.
but for that to be practiced, you need to tell the story. You need to kind of live
Mhm.
the story a bit.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
And we have storytelling apprenticeships in Scotland. Like there's still kind of like a lineage of people who train other people to tell stories. And a lot of them are, well, not a lot of them, a few of them are my pals. And one of them was kind of saying, like, there's beats of a story that you can't miss because that's kind of
Hmm.
what brings people forward. But also then you change it because the story changes with the teller and with the audience.
Hmm.
So there's
Hmm.
bits that you're like, I have to have the giant and I have to have the bird and I have to have the fire and I have to have the transformation and I have to have this. But then when you're telling the story, you're actually you're telling it for the people that you're with, and it's
Hmm.
the people and their reaction and how they I'm slaughtering this from a storyteller friend. I apologize in advance, but it's their reaction to what you're saying and how the timbre and this pace and the breath and the kind of the way that you tell the story changes with every telling of it too.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is particularly around friends who are folk musicians, and they're amazing. If you don't know them, Bird Allen, check them out. They're so good,
Hmm.
amongst others. Uh, so Debbie in Bird Ellen, she takes the songs, and I was speaking to another storyteller actually on Tuesday, and he said everything that you read written down was never read; it was always sung. And I was like, that is a
Hmm.
whole other thing that I would like.
Hmm.
Wow, that's amazing. Like the kind of Greek.
Hmm.
And he's like, well, how else are you going to remember like a massively long story? It's like, very good point. I don't know.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the idea of that we used to sing everywhere and these kind of like histriola stuff suddenly is like a song rather than a story. Anyway, the whole debate for another day. Um, where was it going? I've just went on a massive tangent and I forgot my beginning part. Um, so yeah, changes with the folk with the telling, uh,
Hmm.
songs. Where was I going with that? See my adult brain on a Friday afternoon.
Hmm.
But yeah, like it's the beat and the kind of where you're coming from with people that you're with. So the folkloric stories are one example of that. Um, and the mythic stories are also an example of that. And we know through the science of it that people's brains actually change when they're listening to a story in a
Hmm.
particular atmosphere too. And it's that imaginary space.
Hmm.
Like in Scotland, traditionally, from Samhain to oh gosh, probably around about now, was storytelling season. So it
Hmm.
was like these big mythic stories that you're kind of probably not telling the whole lot of because it would take a week, right? It's just like we're going to talk about uh, when Finn met a dog or whatever. Like is
Hmm.
the story. We would sit together and tell stories, and people would be like, they would add in, like the community would add
Hmm.
in stories. And it was really, I guess, because these stories were so well known, the stories would be added to when people kind of came to the village and they would tell a different version or they would tell another
Hmm.
story that was from kind of those folks too. I kind of forgot my original point, Chase, because I was just tangentially going places.
Hmm.
But yeah, the power of story again, isn't it? It's that kind of,
Hmm.
as you're saying, you're taking people on a journey. Uh, and it's accessible to everybody. And actually,
Hmm.
loads of adults I know love being told stories. They just don't really
Hmm.
like to admit it. Um,
Hmm.
because we do when we put on events together, and when we're looking at kind of like folk belief and folk crafts, there's always an academic element to it too. But the academic element is then brought to life by a storyteller afterwards.
Hmm.
And then maybe some songs or around the kind of crafts and stuff. Um, because it brings it all home in different kind of ways. And I have to say that people love the stories the most part.
Hmm.
Uh, and they love the academic bit. I don't want to put academics off coming to any of the things I do in future. It's really valid, but like it's information in a different way. And I think
Hmm.
stories help us embody stuff because when we imagine stuff, we actually move
Hmm.
in a
Hmm.
kind of micro level too. Um, when we experience an imaginary adversity, the same parts are, but it's like a safe space, isn't it?
I really this well one that we move like when we're moving in the imaginary we're really moving which I think being a folk magic practitioner has helped me really understand that when I'm if I'm, working in that space, it may look like I'm doing very little, but that my body is really there doing these movements and things, and that there's a place in which when the word enchantment gets really messed up culturally right now. Everybody's using it in all these different ways, but when you fall into that kind of enchantment of a story together, you do become this group body that's moving and going through the story and opening up and closing down and all of these elements. And that's my favorite part of the storytelling process, where I'm watching this sort of um, pattern happen across the room. Different things are popping up, and I can see, you know, different images floating above people's heads, and then I can just kind of like walk through them and be like, okay, well, ooh, you have this thing. There's this thing over here that I needed, that I didn't have access to, but now it's over there, in this person in the audience, and I can kind of go check it out. And people think I'm just prowling around the room, kind of because I can't stop walking, but really I'm trying to like find the thing that they have that I can like whatever see in the room, and and then move it into the story. And there's this sense that you're bringing forward where it's the the storyteller actually is really just a mouth for what's going on in the room. And I think I had kind of heard that when I came up in storytelling, and I was studying, and I was reading and learning, and I think starting moving my practice, or adding mm, folk magic into my practice, particularly trolldom, helped me actually clarify and experience that kind of level of things, like the enchantment and the group mind that's happening, and the movement of beings, like like Finn McCool is a character in a story, but it's also a spirit that will come into the room if I do the right moves. Like if we can open the space in the right way, Finn will come in, and then I don't have to do that much work. Actually, Finn just like takes the reins and goes ahead. And you watch Finn have an encounter with the good folk, and you're like, oh, that's a way to do it. I can try that now. I can go out, and I kind of know what to do and what not to do through watching these characters. Um and then it becomes this sort of magico scientific process of testing out the things that happened in the story.
Yeah,
um
like 100% is how, like, I sit within the laity of it. Like I like my skill set is not advanced, or but I totally know what you're talking about when you're in a space and your imagination, even if you like, is 5 steps ahead of what you're actually talking
mhm.
about. And it's like
Yeah.
I like, it happens a lot when I am on stage, when I'm in politically charged environments. Who I am disappears.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then there's another me that is
Mhm.
like, you're reading the room and you know kind of who is going to say what. Like, it just becomes a skill set that is in
Mhm.
embodiment, I think. And I
Mhm.
don't necessarily experience it in the same way that you do, where you can see like a thing. It's more of a feeling that I follow. And
Mhm.
you kind of have to lean into that bit. If you know what I mean, it's that kind of like, no, this is a feeling, I'm going to go with it. And you can feel it. It starts like nerves.
Mhm.
It's not nerves. There's a slight kind of edginess to it, and then there's like a kind of curiosity that kind of comes about, and then you kind of follow that curiosity, and then you start to kind of like, in a room of people, it's like incredible because the nerves disappear and something else is kind of taking shape, and then it's kind of like the magic of community, if you like that.
Mhm.
If you're with a good orator, will take you. You will not feel nervous. You will feel safe, and you'll be on a journey
Mhm.
with people, and it's very similar to what you're talking about, I think.
Mhm.
Like, we do something in a more base way with young people who can't read about storytelling. It's like the theater of the oppressed. Have you heard of this?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so we use that a lot in communities with young people to help them understand what's like bullying, and that's how people learn to face oppression rather than like here's a leaflet about your human rights. Like it's,
Mhm.
and I guess what we're talking about is kind of living a story. Um, and you're talking about it in a kind of folk magical way or a folk practitioner way. I would probably say in a more advanced way than a lot of people who experience um, story and animism in Scotland are probably ready for.
Mhm.
And it is that kind of storytelling poetry level of stuff. Like the extits, what's it called? There's a really fancy name for it. Extix, I can't say it. Improvised on the spot, momentarily things.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
it's like an imbus that we talk about
Mhm. Yeah.
in poetry and in the kind of the folk magic of Scotland. That poetry, uh, and that timbre and that meter does like things to people's brains,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
also kind of bringing the satire on people and things like that. It's
Yeah.
like a huge, it's a gift that you have, Chase, if you can do
Mhm.
that, is what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Like that's really, really cool. Uh,
Mhm.
But it, what I'm also probably trying to say is it manifests in different ways in what people do when they're feeling really passionate or
Mhm.
emboldened or kind of just let the kind of curiosity lead them. Idea of like, actually, I know it enough and I'm embodied in it and enough and I'm comfortable in it enough to not know enough to allow that curiosity and space to kind of activate for me. And then you
Mhm.
just go on this on the kind of, yeah, the journey that you're talking about. It's incredible.
Mhm.
And
I was curious what you might think about the Imboss connection because you know, it's something that's been circling around when in these storytelling spaces where I can watch it happen to other storytellers and myself where suddenly you were just talking and then suddenly like meter and rhythm and timbre like impose themselves accidentally
yeah.
on what's happening. And I watch, you know, my wife is a Shauna singer, and it's kind of a similar thing that I watch her when she gets into the actual field of the singing that she's doing, and then the rhythm imposes itself and the feeling and the rocking starts to happen, and um that that inspiration like takes over that fire in the head just like and then we go somewhere that is like so unexpected, and sometimes like the experience is actually I just black out, like I get to a point in the story and then I black out and then I come back and I'm like and that's and that's the end of the story and I'm like whoa.
That's a
um where are we, what happened, where did we go, and um that I think that there's a similar thing in like my practice as somebody who works with magical currents. mm, I'm waiting for that inspiration to come on about what is needed, and it's less about knowing the recipes and more about like what do I act what's needed, what can I actually do, um, and then just kind of following that thing. And most of the time I couldn't like go back afterwards and write down notes and like create a sort of like archival journal of like, okay, well we all had a fever and here's the 10 things I did and now no one has a fever anymore. It's kind of, it feels like I'm curious like how because you too are this person who lives at like a liminal zone between this public work you're doing with supporting the young people and then your academic work and then your practice work, like you're moving in all of these different fields. And I'm curious like if you have that experience where you kind of drop that academic mind that knows all the things, and then when you call up that practitioner self, like it just kind of waits to know what to do and then runs.
um so I call this process.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to kind of keep it in a space that it's
Yeah.
like feels accessible. So process. So there'll be people call it the flow, which I'm kind of feel
Mm-hmm.
funny about. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so there is the in terms of the social work and the clinical work that I've done, it's called like the clinical gut. And
Mm-hmm.
there's like a whole people talk about like, well, I just did it because it felt like that's what we should be doing. And when I'm writing in an academia, it's kind of like a percolation and it's like part of my process as a writer is to what I just call compost stuff. So I have loads of things that I will just like put into a pile of compost and I will write bits and they won't be fully formed bits, but I will let it just kind of gestate. It's kind of like the
Mm-hmm.
alchemical process that we were talking about when and it eventually just something kind of percolates out of the idea of it. Like I don't try and chase it. I just kind of like dive into it and sleep with it. That sounds weird. I don't sleep with it in a kind of sexy way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe I do because it's all seeking Eros, isn't it? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
Eros that kind of drives all of this stuff. And all of this, as you've been really eloquently saying, is folk magic practice because you're embodied within it. Um, but I guess this is my original point that through across those different modalities, we have different ways of embodying that process. Um, and it is just a process, like it's just we find our way of doing it, I guess, and it's a subjective way, but actually, when we all talk about it, like you've been talking about it, and I experience it, it's very similar in that kind of expression of aha.
Mm-hmm.
I found the thing. And David Lynch, our pal, talks about catching the bigger fish, right? And this is kind of what he's talking about, that kind of uh, surface level idea, and you can go deeper if you want to. And it was because of David Lynch, actually, that I became a transcendental meditation practitioner way back when. I have stories about that, and it was really great. All of this is the same process. It's all deep diving, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the ability to embody that because you're enmeshed in it and your wife's reflection, I think is super accurate that you know it, you kind of embody it. And when you're in that space, like a dancer, you can
Mm-hmm.
improvise the dance to the
Mm-hmm.
music that you know really well.
Yeah.
You don't need to be like, what was the next step again? Like you don't
Yeah.
need to do that because you kind of you know, especially storytellers I know that tell stories all the time know it so well that they don't even need to kind of think about the story because they are doing what you're doing when they're kind of there's the beats that I know that I need to kind of to make it a traditional story, but
Mm-hmm.
there's all of the ways of getting there that I will
Mm-hmm.
completely just in the moment kind of change. But
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone like I love I love listening to people's process conversations and people don't talk about it enough. I was listening to um a ballet dancer today. He's like he was somebody who talks about the uh, I don't draw the outline. Like I'm not
Mm-hmm.
trying to color it in. What I'm trying to
Yeah.
do is explore the answer that me and this other dancer are dancing in that space. And I'm like, this is exactly how you can go around anything in life and how like there's outline writers and then there's kind of exploratory writers who like the process is still the same. And I think when you're embodied in an imaginary world or in a story, you're doing the thing, right? And then you're kind of stepping into this space, and it feels super fucking magical for people that aren't used to being in that process space. And the same thing happens when I'm with a client who needs counseling that when you tune into that person, you can almost, like you say, I can be like, I can almost see the pictures of the things that they're talking about, and you can see which bits is wobbly. I don't necessarily see it as you do, but I feel it like there's a change of a beat or there's a kind of chill wind about a story that you're like, ah, that's something that's like, yeah, something that needs further exploration.
Mm-hmm.
Is it magical or is it human nature? I don't know, but it's all
Yeah.
part. I just call it process. You know, it's just kind
Mm-hmm.
of. I think when you know where you're at enough, that process is something that we all experience. Like,
Brought up that we are the dreamer who wakens within the dream, but who is the dreamer kind of energy that
mm,
there's this like um part of what we're doing when you touch the process, you wake up in the dream, and then but also you realize that you're being dreamt at the same time. And there's that, and I love, for me as a storyteller, it really feels that way. Like I've woken up in the dream and I'm lucid, and I might have the illusion that I now have power to control what's going to unfold. But actually, the experience, when I can like really watch it unfold, is I'm actually being dreamt. I don't have a lot of autonomy anymore. I had more autonomy before I got enchanted, but now I'm being dreamt out loud. And like you're saying, like part of what's dreaming me is what's wobbly in the person in front of me, or the thing that I knew got brought up in the room before I started talking, or um, you know, the house spirit in the place that we're working and doing our event, that I, has clearly came forward and be like, hey, no one's fed me in a year. Like these kinds of elements start dreaming the room, and then
Yeah.
and things happen that could never have, or that are actually needed, and I don't know, maybe it's grandiose, but like there's a way in which we're when we get to that place together in community, I really can feel the way in which like gathering together around songs and stories and crafts and study of magic and practice of magic, like um it's not this flight into fantasy. It's not this like recreational, like I'm gonna, pretend, like here as a settler person in diaspora from my ancestral homelands, like I'm not gonna pretend I live in some fantasy world where it's all cool and I'm still a peasant in the Scottish Highlands. But what I'm actually doing is making a meaningful response to the world through these stories and songs and practices that actually like are here for like this needed to happen right now here, because these spirits needed to get fed, and this person is grieving the death of their mother, and this thing is happening. And there's this way in which I hope, and sometimes I have the experience that um, by trying to like nurture and expand and redream these roots of my ancestral heritage here in a different place, like actually serve that growth of culture that can like really be meaningful for folks. And I think it's hard, like you were saying, like Dukas is like, it's such a Geldom thing and it happens in the land. And like, there's aspects of trolldom that like you happen in the land in Sweden, or, and there's that that are hard to translate to North America.
So, lots of people ask me this question about what can we do where, and I'm like, I don't have the answer. I really don't. I wish I
Mm-hmm.
did. Um, and I just kind of talk about good soup, which is not
Mm-hmm.
an adequate answer, but the idea of, well, if you've got a kind of concept that before we became racially white and the British Imperial Project, there was something that was important. Um, you can bring this to a conversation in a place.
Mm-hmm.
And I like at the heart of what we're talking about, and interestingly for me, it's always about reciprocity and it's always about hospitality, like because you have to make space for it all, and that's being hospitable to ideas and uh, however you want to kind of look at it in the round, um, and to be reciprocal in that, and knowing that people before the British project, I call it that because I don't really know what else to call it, because it does feel like that, and it does feel like in America there was the British colonial project, but it was European wide and bigger. That there is something nutritious, if you like, there's good soup at the middle of that. And the fact that you are then in a space being hospitable to things and ideas, surely then other people will come uh, to that. What was here before, and what do the people have here before the racially white? stuff. I only have what I know, sadly, from a Scottish point of view, and I can't tell people what the Maori experience is or what the First Nations experience is or the Mexican or like I don't why I can't answer the question is because I don't have that piece. But I do hope that having an understanding of what was before opens a dialogue at least between people who part of this story, isn't it? We're going full circle again. It's the story that we tell people and the people understand of you are not me, you are another. And actually no, it's not true. Uh we're all part of kind of each other's systems of support. And if we took away the wider narrative that's happening at the moment, like all we're gonna have is each other. Like and it's not gonna do very well for people to be looking down lines of otherness to define kind of who and where and what is worth in that conversation. Um, so yeah, for me, the answer is I don't have the answer, but I can tell you what the experience of it is here. But also, we've experienced the same disenfranchisement, if you want to be polite, uh, from land and culture, and there is the same kind of upsurge of interest around stuff. And even in Scotland, when it comes to Dukas, people are getting it wrong. And this is why I'm very cautious with the world, because it's also a polysemic word. It means lots of different things to lots of different levels of stuff. Like then again, I'm going to just reiterate, it's for the Gaels to decide what that means. And there's people bringing legal action under the auspice of this uh, relationship that people had with the land that wasn't recognized in the Anglo-Saxon materialism of the law that kind of was inherited for want of a better word. Interesting that you say the connection. There's things from kind of Trolldom and Swedish stuff. We have a lot of that here. I can see one of the things I was interested around studying Trolldom for is to see the connection in Scottish folk magic, and it's really, really apparent how much was exchanged. And it was an exchange at the time, I guess. Once the Vikings came over, I don't know if it was so cool as that, but yeah. So a lot of the folk beliefs that we have translate, obviously, like European wide. Where they become less translatable is from Gaelic culture. Actually, that's like a uh, there's elements, but there's a difference in a lot of the poetry and stuff within Gaeldom is kind of a different meter and a different understanding. But at the heart of it is the same experience. And that's why I always talk about hospitality and reciprocity and this kind of the sacred thread that runs through everything. Because if we don't have that, we don't have shit all, really. And that extends to an animate world too. And that like back full circle to the stories of the Cuban She are all part of that understanding of people in place. And without that, we become a bit rootless. So,
Part of what really touched me about the way you write about Dukas now in your book and the way you're talking about it now and its connection with the Creven She is the both the like cultural togetherness element and the connection to place and the more than human world element and then the political element that land rights element and that connection like what it means for people to be woven in with landscape and then how that translates onto the political stage as far as and how that was stripped away with these Anglo-Saxon law codes. But that, there's something in there that really woke something up in me as somebody with Scottish heritage, cultural practice, magical practice, our connection with spirits of place, like, and the connections of the indigenous people here in North America, the Southern Pomo and the Coast Miwok, where I am, like, that's political material. Like it's not separate
no,
for from the life from the political life. And when we're talking about land back, we're also talking about life ways back, and we're talking about like relationship with spirits and place and cultural tradition back. And in order to do that, I think part of what needs to happen is that there's this crack that needs to happen in the story of whiteness around what is real, what is not, who is worth attention, who is not. And I think that that's one of the great um, benefits of people in the diaspora, if you want to call it that, um, turning back towards the story and turning back towards the practice, and even like if it's possible, going back to ancestral homelands and having that kind of experience on the landscape, and less like the tourist experience of like let's go see all the cool stuff, but like the actually like sitting out in these places and having that kind of reckoning, um, because it brings home um, how devastating removal from land is, and how devastating the removal of story and culture and language is, and it creates this place, I think, um, for actual conciliation. Like there's this sense of everyone wants to talk about reconciliation, um, and like between settlers and the people of the lands that have been colonized. And Stephen Jenkinson, this writer, really pointed out in you can't reconcile if there never was conciliation when you first arrived. So this sense of like how do we re-arrive, or how do we on the ancestral level in this ancestral work like ask our ancestors to go back and reconcile so that we can make actual moves of reconciliation now as people like here living in North America. And what does that look like, and trying to learn from these um, cultural processes of sacred hospitality and reciprocity. Like, what does it mean to live that as somebody now? Is I mean, in America, this is like really topical. Like, what does it mean to have a cultural value of sacred hospitality in a time when the nation seems hell bent on the exact opposite um, cultural practice? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really big, hard question. But I do what I do in my job because I'm always trying to mend something. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I don't know if you're woo about it. Maybe I have some debt that I need to pay
Mm-hmm.
off for some reason. Maybe my people were cunts. They probably were at some point. Everyone has a cunt in their family. Sorry, that sounds rude. But yeah, and for a really long time, my like, because I've been involved in this stuff since like the 1990s. When you were three, Chase, I was like kicking around. How nice for me. Um, and it never the twain met. They were
Mm-hmm.
always kind of like, and you go through all of those kind of different things, and it's only until in the last, I think, 7 years or so that I've realized actually if you it's what we're talking about is actually an everyday experience, and that's when you're talking about folk magic, my instinct is to bring it back to process because it's
Mm-hmm.
what everyone experiences all the time and it's not
Mm-hmm.
unusual, and I try and couch it in a language that translates, because when you hear words, people are like, what? And then I'm like, have you ever just driven your car and not really realized that you're driving your car and you've been thinking about uh, a dream you had or a movie you watched, or where did your brain go? Actually, you've been paying no attention to the car, and that is a state, right? The process state. And you've probably imagined some really cool stuff that you've then forgotten because you step out the car and you're at the supermarket or whatever. Um, so yeah, for me, it's just a natural state to be in, and
Mm-hmm.
the more we unmystify it and take away these funny, weird gatekeeping people that exist around these kind of ideas, the better. But also realize there are people who are specialists in this situation. I'm not one of them. I'm never going to be one of them. Um, who have mad skills in it too that we should probably listen to. But that's too's been so commodified out the fucking ass of stuff that we're no longer sure who they are anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This is where First Nations cultures and others who have those people within them, we look to, I guess, and why we have traditionally. But in terms of the idea of Dukas, and if this is useful, it became a huge political issue in Scotland. So much so that the Highland Land movement happened, and so much so that then the Crofters Act was passed, and then after the end of the clearances, and then it went on, trickled underneath things to form the Scottish Nationalist Party, who were the kind of we want independence back people, and they
Mm-hmm.
still exist today. And not many people realize the roots are through into land use. And like the debates are really lively in Scotland at the moment. We have like the richest billionaire from Sweden, funny enough, who's buying all of Scotland. He's the guy from ASOS, uh, billionaire who
Mm-hmm.
is. I'm I'm just gonna watch what I say, but he owns a lot of space. He has a company called Wildlands, who are rewilding a lot of the parts of Scotland, and he has been buying a lot of properties and spaces, and has quick become the only kind of game in town for people in
Mm-hmm.
Scotland in particular areas. Uh, but is he rewilding in the way that's, there's a lot of question marks around what he's doing in Scotland and the use of the land. And when you think about what he's doing, and then Dukas and the storied places that he is buying up and turning into hotels, it kind of, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a whole, and hence why even more so there are communities who are looking to explore these ideas and legally challenging it. There was a legal challenge from this, I think I already said, from the new clan chief of the MacDonald clan, who was like, uh, due to Dukas, this is all our fucking space, and let's take it to court, see what we can do about it. Funny enough, it doesn't exist in law because it was not recognized when the acts of union and all the rest of it were kind of signed, and the riots that happened. So it's still like why I'm talking about it, it's still alive now. And it's just the same debate that's happening all over the world with
Mm-hmm.
different people. Just a billionaire owning stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
Why do you need it all? Like why?
Yeah.
What's that all about? So yeah, it like and it's the story of what we're being told by him. That's like his website's really nice, and it's all rewildy kind of looking. If you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean, it looks like he's doing the right thing, but there's a lot of people questioning whether it is or not. Um, So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
none of it's not connected, and it goes back, I guess, what we were talking about at the start, like the onion of people and place and community. But I think the best way to start with all of this, if you want to take away all of the kind of the mysticism and enchantment with it, just get to know your neighbors and
Mm-hmm.
walk around and say hi and have a conversation about where they come from. Like, start there, right? That's dead easy.
Thank you for just like bringing it alive in the now. Like it's not all backward facing, right? Like we're actually living into the unfolding of all of these elements currently, and it's I think that's where my greatest inspiration is these days. It's like, where is this not a museum artifact, but it's like really running and really moving, and like the longer I start to sit in that question, the more is revealed of like these little tiny like mustard seed sized things that were still going around in my family, like luck charms and little historiola and things that have survived because they were important, because they mattered, to my grandparents and to their parents, and I think that there's a way in which that happens across scale, like you're talking about, like uh, figuring out what to do in the face of billionaire land buying, and also like we can see what's still alive, and work with these traditions, and have them be living fires instead of embers, or instead
Yeah.
of ashes,
I
um,
do totally think though kids just get it instinctively. I read a really beautiful thing the other day where someone witnessed a kid just go up to a tree with their last sweet and they said like for the birds or the fairies, whatever. And then they
yeah.
just left it on the branch and then just disappeared. Um, does it like what I believe we've talked about words that have meaning here, but it's the behavior of those words that happen. And even if
Mm-hmm.
we don't know the thing and the words to say or the what the practice is, we still instinctively know like what we're doing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think people are caught up sometimes in the performance of it. Like they have to know the right things and blah blah blah. Actually, like how do you make friends? It's literally that, right? You don't
Mm-hmm.
need some fancy. I think paganism has done us a disservice here. Um, you don't need some fancy stuff. You don't need robes and a sword and a stick and a crystal and a tablet and a thing. You just need to be like, well, like, how do I make pals? And I think kids instinctively know, like, they have a really active, if you want, imagination before they realize maybe where that imagination can take them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just reacting to their environment in a way that's pretty kind of like, well, this is how we make pals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but having a sweet on a branch of a tree is just a form of hospitality. It's like I'm just being nice. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where it begins. And I don't think people look for authenticity because they've had the authenticity run out of them on a big rail, literally. But it's kind of like, are we looking for the words or are we looking for permission to experience? Which I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes we look for the words to give us permission to experience.
Mm.
Whereas actually, just you're already experiencing it. You don't need someone's permission, but because we're all experiencing it all the time.
I'm just so grateful for you, Scott. I mean, we've, just to have the time to chat, and also like just the mm, building relationship with you, the back and forth, and um, so thankful that you'd come on and chat with me and be so generous with what you're unfolding, what you're living, and really,
Well, thanks so much
really
for having me
wonderful.
along. My stomach's rumbling. I don't know about yours, but
Yeah.
yeah, the blueberry pancake chat. I'm gonna have to go and not have pancakes, but eat some cheese because
Yeah.
that's what we do between meals here. So thanks so much for
Incredible.
having me along, Chase. It's been great.
You're welcome.